And Gis is the artificial intelligence voice of Konstantin Kisin, narrating this pod slice summary of the Triggernometry podcast. In this conversation on the Triggernometry podcast, Russel Peters reflects on his comedic evolution and the transformative journey in his career, emphasizing on his unique approach to comedy that often dwells around race, ethnicity, and taboo topics. This is done with the intent to stir reaction and be thought-provoking, leveraging it as a tool for truth-telling, maintaining that comedy's essence is in disrupting norms. Peters started his career as a DJ, playing a diverse range of music across genres. Disclosing his trial phase in boxing, he believes he was more a trainee than a fighter. Interestingly, the prompt to try stand-up comedy came from a family member who acknowledged his raw comic talent. Peters was an active listener of comedy from the 70s, with influence from greats like Eddie Murphy, George Carlin, Cheech and Chong, and Steve Martin. Seeing live stand-up comedy was an enlightening experience, nudging him to venture into the art form, leading him to his first gig at Yuck Yucks, which he recalls as terrible yet rewarding. This initial plunge transformed into a passion. And he began participating in comedy circuits and contests during the 90s. His breakthrough came in 1995 with a 30-minute special on a show called Comics in Canada. His unique blend of stand-up with sketches before commercials garnered him considerable fan mail, marking his first significant stride in the world of stand-up comedy. Despite early setbacks like losing competitions due to accusations of telling someone else's jokes, Peters sees his career trajectory as playing the long game, emphasizing the importance of persistence and evolution in comedy. In the podcast, Peters dives into the intricacies, controversies, and peculiarities of his career, which is marked with abundant instances of talking about taboo topics. Recalling an incident, he shares how he initially received backlash from the Indian community in Canada for his joke. Navigating through a threatening scenario, Peters emphasizes on the crucial principle of fight or flight. Speaking about the criticism he faced, Peters illustrated how no Indian comedian had represented the community mainstream before him, making the audience apprehensive of his representation that was brimming with eccentric ideas. The fear of misrepresentation or fueling more hate was prevalent among his early audience. However, he candidly regards these concerns and moves to discuss the importance of details in storytelling, most notably through accents. Peters is known for imitating various accents, which he believes enhances the storytelling experience significantly. His guide to imitating any accents is committing to embody the character fully as the context demands. Putting that into practice, he gives a series of examples from his repertoire, illustrating how he uses real words in different languages to ensure he doesn't come across as mocking. Next, he addresses the sensitivity concerning the issue of utilizing accents in comedy today. For Peters, the line between offensive and funny lies in accuracy and context. Interestingly, his knack for getting different accents right led him to fame, as evidenced by his growing fan base from various communities, including Russians and the people from Hong Kong. Reflecting on his journey into comedy in the UK, Peters recalls his encounters with eminent personalities like Junior Simpson, who helped him get on stage in England, and John Keyes, who became his booking agent. In a throwback to 1996, when he participated in Live at Junglers, he remembers sharing the stage with Mitch Hedberg and hosting the show alongside Rick Wakeman. Despite a few jokes that got lost in translation, Peters' candid approach to comedy took deep roots in England. Finally, the conversation sidetracks to discuss sponsors, highlighting their contribution to the show and their extensive range of products. In this portion of the podcast, Peters reflects on his early collaborations with luminaries like Patrice O'Neill, Keith Robinson, and their impact on his comedic style. He remembers staying at Patra's Place in New Jersey and describes his blunt personality as one made to hurt your feelings. Peters reflects on his own comedy, saying his friends made him realize the lack of personalization in his earlier works. This insight led him to cultivate a more insightful and unique style of storytelling, inspired by Patra's honesty and audacity on stage. Tiny Peters also recounts his move to the UK, sharing how he balanced between the UK and Canadian market between 1995 and 2002. Due to the flexible nature of gigs arising from England, he had opportunities to perform at diverse locations like Dublin, Belfast, Belgium, Dubai, Hong Kong, and Singapore, thereby bolstering his international exposure. Going further, Peters delves into the various ups and downs of his career. One significant turning point occurred in 1997 when Peters got a special show named Show Me the Funny. Although his jokes were, well received and even nominated for an award in Canada, his friends were brutally honest about their negative opinion of the show. This fiasco triggered Peters to work harder on his comedic style. talking about his foray into the American comedy scene. Peters emphasizes his impromptu decision to shift base from London to USA. Eventually, in 2003, he got another special show which blew him up. Peters mentions how the act that led to his breakthrough had been honed over time. However, it wasn't immediately evident to him that it would become his breakout performance. Consequently, its success was a combination of his hard work and impeccable timing, coinciding with the peak period of file sharing. Interestingly, despite his growing popularity, financial stability didn't immediately follow. Peters was still tallying gigs that paid him less than previous ones. Yet, by late 2004, bookings increased exponentially. Despite the sudden change, Peters kept his mindset grounded, attributing it to his long-standing presence in the comedy industry. He talks about being hired for various international gigs, giving him the opportunity to tour internationally, including a Canadian tour with the renowned Just for Laughs Comedy Festival. In the Triggernometry podcast interview, Russel Peters talks about his sudden and bewildering rise to comedy fame in the early 2000s, with him selling out shows across the globe, far from his usual locales. He recalls the excitement of touring in Singapore, his astonishment about the crowd's familiarity with him, and his bewilderment about their knowledge of his work. It took for someone to hand him a CD with his act on it for everything to fall into place. His clips were being circulated through file-sharing platforms such as LimeWire and BearShare, leading to his sudden global popularity. However, despite his ballooning success and increasing income, Peters was still filled with doubts, fear, and insecurities. Every good month was just another one that was too good to last, and he had a hard time reconciling that he could maintain this level of prosperity with his comedy. Yet he persisted, using these doubts as motivation to continue his hard work. Even when he attracted the attention of industry heavyweights like Jimmy Miller or Dennis Miller's brother, he wasn't immediately convinced that he had finally made it. Despite getting signed for a sitcom deal and starting to make substantial money, Peters says he still didn't believe he was a star. He says this feeling of being an imposter persists to this day, serving as an ongoing source of motivation in his career. Peters also spoke about his experience of working with comedy legend George Carlin, who he met in 1992 and looked up to as his idol. He recalls the honor he felt in introducing Carlin on stage in 2008, just months before Carlin's death. Russel, and he admired Carlin's work for his intricate wordplay, which also was encouraged in his home, as his father, being an English major, always highlighted the importance of language. Peters concludes his conversation by sharing his perspective on success in comedy. For him, the craft of stand-up is not about chasing fame or fortune, but about the sheer joy of making people laugh. He, emphasizes that comedy is not about saving lives, challenging the notion that his work constitutes hard work. Despite his incredible success, Peters remains humble and committed to his craft. Russel Peters delves deeper into the comedic minds that have influenced his career. He brings up comedic titans such as George Carlin, Steve Martin, Don Rickles, Bob Newhart, and Eddie Murphy. Contrary to popular opinion, he admits that Richard Pryor, though he appreciates his work, didn't resonate with him as much as the others. For Peters, Eddie Murphy was someone who could transport his audience, making them live the story through stellar accents and impersonations. Andrew Dice Clay also profoundly impacted him and made him realize that in comedy, one could be raw and authentic. Discussing about the progression of comedy over the years, Peters reflects on the pressure on comedians in the late 80s and early 90s to maintain a clean routine for television appearances. Whilst he respected the ability of some comedians to create smart, clean comedy, Peters was always more interested in being humorous than clever. The comedian emphasizes the importance of intent in comedy. Given the vast experience and deep understanding of his craft, he carefully thinks through his jokes to avoid any potential misinterpretation or backlash. He takes pride in his approach, stating that if he were to change his style to appease those who don't buy his tickets, he would lose the loyal audience that does. Furthermore, Peter observes the growing trend of social media outrages and that the individuals involved are rarely those who regularly engage with the content or purchase tickets. And people, he notes, are increasingly taking comedians' past jokes out of context and criticizing them in light of present-day standards. A habit he believes heavily hinders the progress and evolution of comedy. Peters strongly rejects the notion that his use of accents in his act has set back the representation of his community by hundreds of years. Instead, he argues that he has pushed it forward. As an Asian comedian, he had to go through hardships, confrontations, and rejections in small town bars, enduring difficulties so that upcoming comedians wouldn't have to. That hardship formed part of his journey to break barriers and pave the way for other Asian comedians. In reflection, he applauds the comedy show Goodness Gracious Me for its timelessness, remarking its relevance even in today's comedy scene. Finally, Peters firmly states that it's nonsensical to judge past works based on current expectations, as it erases historical context and impedes learning from previous experiences and mistakes. In a revealing conversation between Russell Peters, Konstantin Kisin, and other hosts, Peters discusses various aspects of the comedy industry, his career, and the social dynamics at play in a world infatuated with instant outrage. Peters passionately comes to the defense of his fellow comedian and friend after they were wrongly pegged as a racist, stating that he had to defend him even to close friends. He cautions against this growing tendency of trying to tear down individuals due to misinterpretations or the pursuit of an agenda. In this case, an attempt to take away his friend's Spotify money. This conversation segues into discussions about disdain for certain forms of art, as Peters admits his distaste for today's rap music. After some introspection, he resolves that since it's not made for him, he shouldn't critique it. It's not bad, just not to his taste. As the host and Peters all agree that it's easy to forget the subjective nature of taste, and that one's personal opinion doesn't define the overall quality or value of a work. Further illustrating his eye for spotting talent, Peters tells how he recommended rising stars Matt Orr and Theo Von to his agency, who unfortunately turned them down. However, these individuals have since flourished, proving Peters' judgment correct. He emphasizes the importance of organically built careers, using his own as a shining example. Despite industry resistance and exclusion from certain circles, Peters says his loyal and solid fan base has kept him going, a sentiment he reciprocates by tirelessly working to keep their support. Peters looks back on his career with a sense of luck and profound gratitude. He attributes his success to perfect timing. His special aired just before YouTube became popular, allowing his content to reach a wider audience. People were able to listen to his shows earlier and watch them later, strengthening their connection with him. Living with his childhood heroes like Big Daddy Kane, Lil Cool J, and Lord Finesse puts things into perspective for Peters. This reminds him of the power of well-articulated points and substantive dialogues, something he admires in Kisin's style. In this engrossing continuation of the conversation with Russell Peters on Triggernometry podcast, the conversation shifts towards personal worldviews. Peters expresses frustration with individuals who refuse to budge from their perspective even when presented with a reasoned explanation. He opens up about feeling irked when people impose their worldview on others. Peters sees this behavior, combined with a lack of understanding towards the problems of others, as manifestations of an increasingly narcissistic society. In Peters' view, narcissism is a scourge. Even in his industry, where he's encountered many such personalities, he humorously distinguishes between comedians who are often associated with narcissism and narcissists, drawing a line between the two based on personal experience. The conversation takes a contemplative turn when Peters is asked what society should be talking about more. His response brings up the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a topic often framed in terms of religion, Jews versus Muslims, like nationality, Israelis versus Palestinians. However, drawing from insights gathered while visiting the Arab world, Peters suggests that the issue is racially charged. He explains that it's perceived as a white vs. non-white issue, stating that Israelis identify as white while Palestinians are seen as non-white. This perspective throws a new light on the conflict and its international support dynamics. Peters also amusingly recalls his famous comedic bit about his father, titled "Somebody Gonna Get Hurt Real Bad." This candidly engaging dialogue with Peters shows him as a thinker, comedian, and empathetic observer of society's dynamics, reflecting on controversial issues and personal experiences with equal insightful depth.